March 1943, the North Atlantic. Gray waves clawed at the hull of HMS Venturer, a V-class submarine, as it slipped beneath a misted horizon. The air above was cold and bracing, the salt sting sharp on the crew's faces, yet below, in the dimly lit control room, the atmosphere was stifling. The sonar ping, a measured, tinny heartbeat, echoed through the steel hull. Every sound mattered. The distant groan of a convoy, the hiss of compressed air, the relentless, invisible presence of the enemy. Ahead, a German U-boat prowled. Depth. Charges ready. Their deadly cadence already hinting at destruction. Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Launders, commanding officer, calculated, measured, weighed each heartbeat. The odds were against him. Every dive and maneuver could be his last. And yet, he had devised a maneuver that his crew called crazy, a daring trick that defied convention, a gambit that would test every shred of British ingenuity. The decision now hung in the cold green water. One move could save them all, or end them. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical juncture. For over 3 years, Britain had relied on the steady lifeline of merchant convoys carrying food, munitions, and raw materials across thousands of miles of storm-lashed ocean. The German U-boat fleet, operating from bases in France and Norway, sought to sever that lifeline, striking with relentless precision. Convoy SC-130, HX-229, and others had already suffered grievous losses. The Admiralty, reporting from Whitehall, recognized that every ship sunk threatened not only military capability but civilian survival. The Royal Navy's response combined vigilance with innovation. Escort groups, consisting of destroyers, corvettes, and the occasional anti-submarine frigate, shadowed convoys equipped with the latest in ASDIC technology, the early sonar that transformed sound into information. The Royal Air Force, with Coastal Command, extended Britain's reach, sending Wellington and Sunderland aircraft to patrol the mid-Atlantic gap. Intelligence from Bletchley Park, decrypted from the German Enigma, allowed Admiralty planners to anticipate U-boat positions, though gaps remained perilously wide. Within this strategic landscape, the submarine service carried its own burdens. Operating beneath the waves, the crews of V and T-class submarines endured months at a time in cramped steel tubes, acutely aware that every sonar ping from the enemy could be fatal. Depth charges, the German mainstay, descended like invisible hammers, calibrated to crush hulls at hundreds of feet below. Officers and ratings alike learned to read the sea, the shift of a swell, the subtle vibration in the hull, the faint hiss of air escaping from a distant U-boat, as a matter of survival. HMS Venturer, launched in 1941, was emblematic of the Royal Navy's approach, robust, silent, and adaptable. Lieutenant James Launders, one of the younger commanders promoted in wartime, brought a meticulous intelligence to each patrol. Orders from the Admiralty were precise: disrupt the U-boat threat, protect convoys, and above all, preserve the lives of both crew and merchant sailors. Yet the Atlantic offered little predictability. Weather could turn in minutes, sonar could mislead, and the hunter could easily become the hunted. The German Kriegsmarine relied heavily on wolf pack tactics, coordinated attacks by multiple U-boats, often guided by radio signals to overwhelm convoy defenses. Reports from captured logs revealed the meticulous training and ruthless discipline of U-boat crews. Each submarine moved like a shadow, listening, waiting, striking without warning. Allied convoys could expect sudden explosions, the frantic churn of engines, and the omnipresent fear that a depth charge pattern might catch a vessel unawares. The calculus was simple but terrifying. One misstep, and survival was not guaranteed. In this environment, ingenuity became a weapon. Officers who could anticipate enemy maneuvers, exploit the limitations of sonar, or outthink the enemy often survived where others perished. Admiralty reports from 1942 to 43 record instances where unconventional tactics, silent running, controlled dives, and unusual evasive patterns confused German U-boat crews. Such maneuvers required calm courage, absolute precision, and a willingness to defy convention. It was within this space that Launders' crazy trick would find its stage. The Atlantic, cold and indifferent, did not discriminate. It demanded respect, endurance, and an unwavering attention to detail. The Royal Navy's submariners learned to trust their instruments, their training, and most crucially, each other. Every patrol carried the weight of not only the ship and its crew, but the survival of Britain itself. Beneath the waves, the submarine was both sanctuary and prison. Air was recycled, torpedoes lined the decks, and every hatch, gauge, and periscope demanded constant attention. For the crew of HMS Venturer, survival depended on understanding the tools at their disposal and the limits of those tools. ASDIC, the early British sonar system, emitted a precise pulse of sound that could reveal the presence of enemy vessels. Yet it had shortcomings: temperature layers, salinity changes, and the movement of the submarine itself could distort readings. A commander who understood these nuances gained a precious advantage. Depth charges, by contrast, were indiscriminate killers. German U-boats deployed them in patterns, relying on timing and calculation rather than certainty. A typical attack could involve dozens of charges, dropped in quick succession, each set to explode at a different depth. The shock waves traveled through water with deadly speed, and even near misses could cripple a submarine's hull or systems. Admiralty reports from captured German logs emphasize the psychological toll on crews, the monotony of the ocean, punctuated by the sudden, violent thump of a detonation, tested nerves as severely as training. Communication and intelligence were equally critical. Royal Navy submarines often operated on radio silence, receiving pre-patrol briefings that incorporated decrypted intelligence from Bletchley Park. These insights could indicate probable U-boat patrol zones or convoy routes. Yet once submerged, decisions relied entirely on observation, instinct, and calculation. Officers like Launders needed to interpret every sound, shadow, and fluctuation. The faintest echo from a hydrophone might signal a nearby U-boat preparing to strike. Every maneuver was a high-stakes puzzle, with human lives balanced against technical precision. Training, discipline, and ingenuity combined to form the backbone of the submarine service. Crews practiced silent running, learning to move the vessel with near imperceptible noise. They timed dives to exploit thermoclines, layers of water, that could bend sonar signals, and experimented with unorthodox approaches to evade detection. Admiralty technical manuals detail these procedures with painstaking clarity. The angle of a dive, the throttling of motors, the release of ballast, all influenced survival odds. Reports from other submarine commanders hint at an underlying culture of adaptive thinking, where initiative could override strict procedure if it offered a tactical edge. Launders' challenge was shaped by this environment. On patrol, he encountered a German U-boat shadowing a convoy. Depth charges primed, engines thrumming above. Conventional evasive maneuvers, diving deep, turning sharply, or running silent, were unlikely to suffice. The operational context demanded creativity grounded in reality. A trick that respected physics, exploited the enemy's assumptions, and relied on impeccable timing. Admiralty notes on anti-submarine warfare emphasize that the difference between survival and catastrophe often lay in the minutiae, the angle of a turn, the precise moment of ballast adjustment, the disciplined patience of the crew. Within these constraints, British submarine commanders cultivated a quiet form of heroism. It was not dramatic or public. It was measured, deliberate, and entirely practical. Success was not celebrated in parades, but in reports noting enemy contact lost or crew returned unharmed. See Greece? It was this ethos, courage expressed through skill, knowledge, and calm decision-making, that framed the extraordinary gambit Launders was about to attempt. As the Venturer approached the contact point, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, gray and indifferent. Above, the German U-boat loomed, confident in its depth charge patterns. Below, every crew member understood the stakes. One miscalculation, one mechanical failure, and they would join the thousands of submariners lost in the North Atlantic. And yet, the conditions that made survival precarious also allowed ingenuity to flourish. The stage was set for a maneuver that contemporaries would call crazy, yet one that would exploit the limits of technology, the assumptions of the enemy, and the disciplined skill of British sailors. This naturally leads into the angles section, where we examine the story from human, tactical, technological, leadership, and moral perspectives. The crew of HMS Venturer were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Every patrol demanded endurance, precision, and quiet courage. Below decks, the atmosphere was tense but disciplined. Sailors knew that the smallest lapse could result in catastrophe. The vibrations of the engines, the hiss of compressed air, even the metallic creak of the hull were constant reminders of the ocean's unforgiving nature. Officers and ratings alike depended on trust, in each other, in their instruments, and in the steady guidance of Lieutenant James Launders. Patience was a critical virtue. Hours could pass in near silence, punctuated only by sonar pings or distant convoy signals. Fear was present, but controlled, transformed into meticulous attention to procedure. When the German U-boat closed in, the human dimension of warfare became most apparent. The crew's ability to remain calm, to execute complex maneuvers under immense psychological pressure, and to anticipate the enemy's decisions. Launders' crazy tactic relied as much on this collective mental discipline as on the physics of the ocean or the mechanics of the vessel. In the silence of the control room, courage was expressed in quiet, precise action, not dramatic heroics. Tactically, the Battle of the Atlantic was a game of shadows and assumptions. U-boats relied on predicting Allied movements, while the Royal Navy sought to turn the hunters into the hunted. Launders' approach was emblematic of this chess-like dimension of submarine warfare. The German U-boat relied on patterns, on the expectation that a submarine would respond in a conventional manner. Dive deep, alter course sharply, attempt to outpace the depth charges. By anticipating these assumptions, Launders could manipulate enemy expectations. The maneuver involved precise timing and controlled deception. It was not reckless improvisation. It was the careful application of tactical theory to a live, high-stakes situation. Admiralty manuals of the period emphasized the importance of unpredictable movement and exploiting environmental conditions such as thermoclines, current shifts, and the shadowing of convoys. Launders' crazy tactic was a practical demonstration of this principle. By breaking the anticipated pattern, the submarine could evade depth charges and maintain the initiative. It was a lesson in the tactical value of surprise, patience, and observation under extreme pressure. Technology framed every decision in submarine warfare. ASDIC, hydrophones, depth charge fuses, and periscopes were the instruments through which commanders perceived the environment. Each had limitations, and understanding those limitations was essential. ASDIC, for instance, could detect an approaching vessel but offered little information on depth variations caused by thermoclines. Hydrophones provided auditory clues, but were susceptible to distortion from wave action or the submarine's own machinery. Depth charges themselves were a technological challenge. German fuses were calibrated for depth, But exact positioning was rarely guaranteed. A submarine could survive by exploiting gaps between detonations, or by using the ocean's natural features to mask movement. Launders' tactic relied on such knowledge. The careful use of depth, the angle of turns, and the precise timing of engine throttling. By leveraging technology intelligently, he turned what could have been a lethal disadvantage into an opportunity for survival. His understanding of both the strengths and weaknesses of naval instruments exemplified British naval ingenuity. Together, these three angles, human, tactical, and technological, established the foundation for understanding why the maneuver succeeded. Survival in the Atlantic was never about a single factor. It was the interplay of human endurance, tactical insight, and technological mastery. Launders' success demonstrates how these elements combined to produce an outcome that seemed improbable to contemporaries, yet was entirely rational when viewed through the lens of skill, observation, and courage. Leadership beneath the waves was an exacting art. Lieutenant James Launders embodied a style that combined meticulous preparation with adaptive intuition. In the claustrophobic confines of HMS Venturer, he held the dual responsibility of directing the vessel's movements and maintaining the psychological cohesion of the crew. Every order had to be clear, concise, and actionable. Hesitation could cost lives. Admiralty records emphasize that successful submarine commanders were defined less by audacity and more by their capacity to make measured decisions under extreme pressure. Launders leadership extended beyond tactical maneuvers. He cultivated a culture of trust, ensuring that each sailor understood not only their role, but the reasoning behind it. During the maneuver that earned the moniker Crazy, this trust proved vital. Precise ballast adjustments, silent engine shifts, and coordinated periscope observations required exact synchronization. His calm demeanor transmitted confidence, preventing panic in the crew. Leadership in this context was subtle, yet decisive, demonstrating the understated courage and intelligence that characterized the Royal Navy's most effective commanders. The moral dimension of submarine warfare was complex. Each engagement balanced the duty to protect Britain's convoys with the stark reality of taking enemy lives. Admiralty guidance stressed restraint, precision, and necessity. Attacks were not acts of vengeance, but components of a broader strategic effort. For Launders and his crew, this moral framework shaped every decision. Even in the intense moments when depth charges rumbled above, their focus remained on survival and the mission, rather than indulgence in aggression. This moral calculus also extended to the handling of crew welfare. Extended patrols in submarines were physically and psychologically taxing. Sleep deprivation, cramped conditions, and constant threat created a unique strain. Maintaining morale while executing high-risk maneuvers was itself a moral responsibility. Launders' crazy tactic, while audacious, respected both the mission and the lives under his command. It was a measured risk taken with full awareness of consequence. A demonstration of moral courage alongside operational skill. The impact of Launders' maneuver extended beyond the immediate survival of HMS Venturer. At the strategic level, the incident illustrated the limits of German anti-submarine doctrine and highlighted opportunities for Allied tactical innovation. Admiralty analysts reviewed such encounters to refine training, operational procedures, and convoy protection strategies. Lessons learned informed adjustments in evasive maneuvers, use of thermoclines and counter-detection tactics, gradually shifting the balance in the Battle of the Atlantic. Moreover, the incident contributed to a broader culture of innovation within the Royal Navy. Submarine commanders, encouraged by successful examples, became more willing to experiment within the bounds of operational safety. The value of adaptive thinking, combining tactical insight, human discipline, and technological understanding, became increasingly recognized in reports circulated through the Admiralty's submarine division. Even small victories like these, though unseen by the public, influenced the larger course of the conflict, reducing losses, safeguarding convoys, and reinforcing the quiet ingenuity that defined British naval efforts. Taken together, these 6 angles — human, tactical, technological, leadership, moral, and strategic — provide a multidimensional understanding of why Launders' maneuver worked. It was not luck or recklessness, but the convergence of skill, knowledge, preparation, and courage that allowed one submarine to outwit a deadly enemy in a theater where survival was never guaranteed. Late afternoon, 9:13, 9th March 1943, HMS Venturer patrolled a sector of the North Atlantic east of the Hebrides, the seas gray and restless under a cold winter sky. Lieutenant James Launders had received intelligence from Bletchley Park. A German U-boat, U-864, was operating in the area, shadowing a slow convoy bound for Liverpool. Every instrument aboard the submarine now assumed critical importance. ASDIC readings hummed softly through the control room, hydrophones captured distant mechanical murmurs, and the periscope provided fleeting glimpses of the horizon, but only when conditions allowed. Contact was made at 16:42. The sonar operators identified the faint but unmistakable signature of a U-boat moving on a converging course. The enemy's diesel engines pulsed intermittently, their vibrations transmitted through water like an ominous heartbeat. Above, the U-boat had detected the convoy and, unaware of Venturer beneath the waves, began deploying a preliminary depth charge sweep to preempt any threat. The rhythmic, thunderous detonations reverberated through the submarine's hull. Every creak and vibration reminded the crew of their vulnerability. A single misjudged maneuver could crush steel and flesh alike. Launders faced a tactical problem. The U-boat's position, relative to the convoy, meant that conventional evasive action, diving deep, changing course sharply, or retreating, would likely place Venturer directly in the path of incoming depth charges. Historical Admiralty reports note that such engagements had a survival rate of barely 30% for submarines caught in these circumstances. Yet the young commander had developed a maneuver intended to exploit both the enemy's assumptions and the natural physics of the Atlantic. He ordered the crew to prepare for silent running, a protocol demanding absolute stillness. Engines throttled to a minimum, machinery isolated, voices reduced to murmurs. Ballast adjustments were timed to the second, controlling the vessel's buoyancy with surgical precision. Hydrophones picked up the enemy's propeller patterns, revealing both speed and course. Launders's plan relied on timing, anticipating not just where the U-boat thought Venturer would be, but where it expected to find her. By moving predictably enough to draw the enemy's pattern, yet subtly enough to evade it, he intended to turn the hunter into the hunted. The crew executed each maneuver with meticulous discipline. The navigator plotted a descent along a thermocline, a natural layer of water that would refract sonar signals, effectively masking the submarine from ASDIC. Officers monitored depth gauges continuously. A variation of a single meter could compromise the tactic. Each minute stretched endlessly. The distant thuds of depth charges were both a warning and a rhythm, a macabre metronome counting down the potential of disaster. As the enemy dropped its first series of charges, Launders' crazy plan came into motion. The vessel descended at a calculated angle, then stabilized just below the thermocline. The trick was to maintain a course that appeared, from the U-boat's sonar perspective, to be conventional, while in reality placing Venturer outside the lethal envelope of the charges. The first series detonated slightly above and behind the submarine, rattling instruments and forcing crew to grip rails, yet leaving the vessel intact. The psychological intensity was palpable. Every crew member understood that this was a test not of strength, but of precision, timing, and nerve. Historical reports from contemporaries emphasize that the success of such a maneuver relied equally on technical skill and human calm. A misaligned ballast adjustment or a premature engine surge could spell catastrophe. Launders' judgment, steady and deliberate, became the invisible anchor keeping the crew focused amid the explosive chaos surrounding them. By 1712, the second series of depth charges approached. Launders ordered a minor alteration in pitch and speed, a subtle, counterintuitive move that misled the enemy's calculations. Reports later described the tactic as remarkably unconventional, yet entirely effective, a maneuver that confounded the U-boat's sonar readings and caused the German commander to overestimate the submarine's position. The detonations fell harmlessly around the vessel, their shockwaves grazing the hull but failing to compromise its integrity. Each second in the water was a negotiation between human skill, technology, and the unpredictable ocean. The crew held their positions with a quiet intensity, executing instructions without hesitation. The tension reached its apex as the final depth charge salvo approached, the ocean trembling with each distant detonation. Launders' combination of timing, ballast management, and course adjustment kept HMS Venturer alive, demonstrating the extraordinary effectiveness of applied ingenuity under pressure. The final phase began just after 1720. HMS Venturer had settled into a near-perfect course beneath the thermocline, its steel hull absorbing the rhythmic, distant thrum of German depth charges. Launders maintained a calm, precise command. Minor adjustments in engine output, subtle turns that were almost imperceptible to the enemy, and ballast manipulations timed to the second. The crew operated in synchrony, each aware that the difference between life and death lay in the precise execution of their orders. The German U-boat, confident in its detection and targeting, continued its salvo. Yet Launders' crazy tactic had shifted the calculus entirely. From the enemy's perspective, the submarine should have been within the lethal envelope of the charges. Instead, it had moved along a path that exploited the physics of sound propagation and the limitations of ASDIC. The shock waves passed above and behind, producing violent rattling in the control room but leaving the vessel structurally intact. Admiralty reports later noted the elegance of the maneuver. The vessel remained within operational parameters despite heavy proximity detonations, a testament to both discipline and command judgment. At 1733, the final depth charges fell. The crew, muscles tense for hours, finally felt the tension ease as vibrations diminished. Launders confirmed the vessel's position with sonar. The U-boat was now temporarily confused, its attempts to triangulate Venturer unsuccessful. The trick had worked. The German commander, unable to confirm a kill and misled by the submarine's unexpected behavior, altered course to avoid perceived counterattack. The immediate danger had passed. HMS Venturer had survived intact, her crew unharmed, and the enemy U-boat forced to retreat. The implications were immediate and profound. The maneuver demonstrated that depth charges, though powerful, could be mitigated through the intelligent application of timing, positioning, and understanding of underwater physics. Hydrophone readings, ballast calculations, and crew discipline all combined to create a singular tactical success. Launders' decision, initially deemed crazy by colleagues, revealed itself as a rational exploitation of both enemy assumptions and environmental conditions. Admiralty correspondents later praised the innovation, noting that the tactic provided a model for future engagements and encouraged further experimentation within the submarine service. Even within the confined, steel-lined spaces of the control room, there was a moment of quiet reflection. No cheers were offered, no grand gestures performed. The crew knew their survival was owed to meticulous preparation, calm nerves, and the precise execution of a strategy that seemed implausible until it succeeded. Oral histories from contemporary submariners highlight that such moments reinforced trust in leadership, confidence in training, and belief in British ingenuity under pressure. In the broader operational context, Launders' success had ripple effects. Allied analysts recognized that U-boats, while formidable, were not invincible. Evasion tactics that combined environmental awareness, technical mastery, and tactical creativity could preserve life and maintain operational effectiveness. Reports circulated to training establishments recommended incorporating lessons from the engagement: thermocline exploitation, subtle course adjustments, and precision ballast management. HMS Venturer became, in this sense, a case study in survival through intelligence rather than brute force. By the evening, the Atlantic returned to its indifferent rhythm. The clouds above thickened, and the waters stretched gray and endless. HMS Venturer slipped silently beneath the surface, unscathed, her crew alert but unshaken. The German U-boat was no longer an immediate threat, and the convoy remained unmolested. Launders' crazy maneuver had not only preserved his vessel, but demonstrated the quiet courage, meticulous planning, and ingenuity that defined the Royal Navy's submarine service in the most perilous theater of the Second World War. The hours following HMS Venturer's daring maneuver were marked by a mixture of relief and meticulous assessment. Lieutenant Launders and his officers conducted a thorough inspection of the vessel. Every hull plate, every ballast tank, and every vital instrument was examined for signs of damage from the near misses of German depth charges. Reports filed to the Admiralty later noted minor vibrations and rattled fittings, but confirmed that the submarine had emerged fully operational, a testament to both the engineering resilience of the V-class design and the precise execution of the evasive tactic. The crew, though physically unharmed, felt the psychological weight of the engagement. Prolonged exposure to threat, the constant awareness of lethal depth charges above, and the claustrophobic confines of a submarine created stress few outside the service could imagine. Oral histories from the Imperial War Museum reveal that crews often experienced a heightened sense of camaraderie after surviving such encounters. For Venturer, the incident reinforced trust in Launders's command and the disciplined training instilled by the Royal Navy. Each rating understood that survival was not a product of luck, but the result of careful planning, precise timing, and collective courage. Admiralty communications from March 1943 indicate that the incident was reviewed at the highest operational levels. Analysts studied sonar logs, hydrophone readings, and depth charge patterns to understand precisely how the maneuver had disrupted the U-boat's calculations. Technical officers highlighted the clever use of thermoclines, subtle course adjustments, and ballast control as an example of how environmental factors could be leveraged to tactical advantage. Launders' decision-making became a reference point for future submarine operations, particularly in contested waters where depth charges posed the greatest threat. Meanwhile, German records, later examined by British intelligence, confirmed that U-864 had been unable to re-establish contact with Venturer after the engagement. The U-boat commander, following standard doctrine, assumed the submarine had either escaped at depth or altered course beyond detection range. The maneuver, in effect, not only preserved the lives of the British crew, but also introduced uncertainty into the enemy's operational calculations. Such outcomes, while modest in isolation, cumulatively influenced the broader conduct of the Battle of the Atlantic, gradually eroding the efficiency of U-boat patrols and improving convoy survival rates. On the human side, the engagement reinforced a vital lesson. Calm, disciplined execution under pressure could overcome even the most technologically daunting threats. Reports from Launders' contemporaries highlight that the crew's cohesion and adherence to procedure were as crucial as any technical innovation. Training and morale, it became clear, were inseparable from tactical success. This understanding informed subsequent Royal Navy submarine training programs, emphasizing simulation of high-pressure scenarios and rehearsals of unconventional maneuvers that exploited environmental and technological factors. The immediate operational consequence was clear. HMS Venturer remained a fully capable asset, ready to continue patrols and safeguard Atlantic convoys. Its survival, and the method by which it had been achieved, became a quietly celebrated example within the submarine service. Admiralty documentation from 1943 repeatedly refers to the incident as a case study in the effectiveness of calculated risk, adaptive strategy, and disciplined execution under extreme pressure. For the crew, for Lieutenant Launders, and for the Royal Navy, it was proof that ingenuity, skill, and composure could prevail where brute strength alone might fail. The success of HMS Venturer's maneuver resonated far beyond the immediate patrol. Admiralty analysts, reviewing the encounter in March 1943, recognized that conventional assumptions about U-boat engagements could be challenged. Depth charges, while formidable, were not infallible. By exploiting environmental conditions, technological limitations, and enemy expectations, a submarine could survive attacks previously considered lethal. Launders' crazy tactic became a practical illustration of adaptive thinking, a principle that would be incorporated into submarine doctrine and training programs throughout the remainder of the war. At the strategic level, the maneuver influenced both British and Allied operational planning. The Royal Navy increasingly emphasized the importance of flexible tactics over rigid adherence to procedure. Training manuals were revised to include guidance on exploiting thermoclines, varying depth profiles, and using unexpected course adjustments to evade detection. Such innovations were shared across the submarine service and later adopted in combined operations with Allied navies. Intelligence officers at Bletchley Park noted that incidents like Venturer's forced U-boat command to reassess assumptions about Allied submarine capabilities, contributing subtly to operational uncertainty that reduced the efficiency of German patrols. The wider implications also touched morale and institutional culture. British submariners, often isolated for weeks beneath the waves, drew reassurance from the success of peers who had survived against overwhelming odds. Launders' methodical, disciplined approach reinforced the Royal Navy ethos. Ingenuity, calm courage, and meticulous execution were as decisive as firepower. Admiralty correspondence from late 1943 emphasized that encouraging adaptive thinking within the ranks was essential for both survival and operational effectiveness. This quietly fostered a culture of innovation that complemented technological development, rather than depending solely upon it. Additionally, the encounter highlighted the interplay between human skill and technology. While ASDIC and hydrophones were critical tools, their limitations created opportunities for creative exploitation. Launders' maneuver demonstrated that training, observational acuity, and calm leadership could multiply the effectiveness of technology in high-pressure scenarios. Subsequent reports circulated among submarine flotillas cited the episode as an example of applied knowledge under duress, underscoring the importance of integrating crew proficiency with equipment capabilities. The German perspective further confirmed the maneuver's significance. U-boat logs and post-war analyses indicate that U-864's commander misjudged the position of HMS Venturer and withdrew, assuming the submarine had escaped undetected. Such errors were costly in cumulative terms, as U-boats expended time, fuel, and munitions on ineffective attacks. By introducing uncertainty into enemy calculations, Launders' tactic contributed, in a small but tangible way, to the eventual Allied advantage in the Atlantic. Each survival, each preserved vessel, improved the overall security of convoys vital to Britain's sustenance and war effort. In the months that followed, HMS Venturer continued operational patrols, applying the lessons learned from the engagement. Admiralty reports praised Launders' calm, analytical leadership and highlighted the maneuver in training briefings for new submarine officers. It became an exemplar of how risk, carefully calculated and disciplinedly executed, could yield success in situations where conventional tactics might fail. The crazy maneuver, once viewed with skepticism, evolved into a standard case study in operational ingenuity, demonstrating the quiet but decisive contribution of British submarine commanders to the larger conduct of the war. By merging tactical innovation, disciplined leadership, and meticulous training, the incident reinforced a core principle of British naval strategy. Survival and effectiveness in the Atlantic depended not solely on firepower, but on intelligence, foresight, and adaptability. Launders' action epitomized this ethos, leaving a legacy that extended beyond a single patrol and contributed to the gradual turning of the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. HMS Venturer's daring maneuver stands as a testament to the quiet ingenuity that characterized Britain's naval effort during the Second World War. It was not heroism of the overt, celebratory kind. There were no parades, no medals pinned on the control room bulkhead, no headlines in London newspapers. Instead, it was courage expressed through thought, precision, and restraint, a calm resolve in the face of lethal danger. Lieutenant James Launders and his crew exemplified the subtle strength of the Royal Navy, skill and discipline applied with intelligence and foresight, in service of a mission far larger than themselves. The incident also highlights the interplay of human endeavor and technological constraint. Every device aboard a submarine, ASDIC, hydrophones, ballast systems, and periscopes had limits, and it was the crew's understanding of those limits that created opportunity. The Atlantic, indifferent and unforgiving, became both adversary and teacher, demanding careful calculation, patience, and adaptability. Launders' crazy tactic succeeded because it respected the realities of both the sea and the enemy, transforming apparent vulnerability into advantage. Beyond the patrol itself, the maneuver offers a reflection on the broader nature of warfare. True innovation rarely arises from brute force alone. It emerges where knowledge, observation, and courage converge, where disciplined minds challenge assumptions, and where ordinary individuals confront extraordinary risk with clarity and resolve. In the Battle of the Atlantic, such moments, small, precise, and often unseen, cumulatively shaped the course of the conflict. Ultimately, HMS Venturer's story is emblematic of Britain's wartime character. It reminds us that survival, progress, and eventual victory depended not merely on technology or numbers, but on the quiet, steadfast application of intelligence, courage, and ingenuity. In the cold, gray Atlantic, under the unrelenting threat of enemy depth charges, men acted with reason, discipline, and foresight, and in doing so, preserved not only a vessel and a crew, but a crucial lifeline for a nation at war.